Okay.
Okay, we're maybe if folks want, what we could do is we can start admitting people in because it is 6 and just let people know we'll be getting started in a couple minutes. Does that sound okay? Okay, awesome. Welcome everyone who's joining so far. And then we'll get started.
Hi everyone.
Surge in cases and gathering.
Hello folks, we're just waiting on some folks to be joining and we'll start shortly in the next minute. We have some people in the waiting room, so we'll just admit them and we'll get started shortly. All right, so we'll get started, and I believe some people are still joining, but we'll allow them to join as we go and we'll get started. So on behalf of the Parkdale People's Economy and Toronto Environment Alliance, I'd like to give you all a warm welcome. My name is Chimi Lamo, my pronouns are she and her, and it's an honor to be hosting our Parkdale Climate Justice first learning session with Push Buffalo. So to get started, we're going to do a quick Zoom overview. Option number 1, where there is a mic, you can click on that to mute or unmute yourself. And Although we love seeing your faces, if your Wi-Fi is a little bit unstable, you can click on the option number 2 to take yourself off camera. It seems to do the trick. And number 3 is the participant tab, where you can click on to raise or lower your hand if you have any questions. You can feel free to raise a hand and we can address them during our group Q&A session. You can also have the option of renaming yourself, which is very helpful during our group discussion. And we also have the number 4 chat option, which is the chat box tab. And you can post comments, questions, and we will make sure to raise those questions during our discussion. And throughout the conversation and today, we will also be posting links, if you helpful links that you can click on and read about later on. We're also really excited that today we will be joined by Tsao Nobala, who will be interpreting in the Tibetan language. So on your Zoom, again, you'll see a world sign, and you can click on that for interpretation. And you can click on number 2 is the language that you'd like to hear. And today, as I mentioned, we'll be doing. And number 3 is you can mute the original audio if you would like to hear only in the interpreted language, which is Tibetan. All right. So at PPPE, Parkdale People's Economy, any initiative that we do, we ensure that we do the land acknowledgements before every initiative that we have. And as settlers in Toronto, apologies, is it just me or is there a noise at the background that you folks can hear? Maybe I can ask folks to mute themselves. Oh, amazing. It seems like it left. Perfect. We're good to go? Okay. I'll continue. And if there is a feedback or background noise, please do let me know in the chat. All right. So as settlers in Toronto, we have all directly benefited from the colonization and the genocide of the original caretakers of this land. And in order to engage in resistance and solidarity against the injustices that have been inflicted upon the Indigenous people, I believe that it's imperative that we're constantly engaging in acts of decolonization and to constantly be reflecting on what that actually means. And one step towards that is actually acknowledging the land that we're on. That for thousands and thousands of years, this land has been the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Petun First Nations, the Seneca, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, under the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Treaty. That has been said to be a peace treaty between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee to share the resources as long as the dish never runs dry. I believe Teresa is having some background noise. Can you all folks, everyone can hear a background noise? Apologies.
Yes, it's really loud. So it sounds like a pan on the background.
Let me see.
It sounds like a wind.
Hearing this? Teresa, do you mind checking? Oh, seems like Peter is also having some issues.
Most of us can hear it, so I don't know.
All right. Maybe we can take a moment to quickly mute everyone and see if that gets better.
I think it's from your background.
On my end?
I think so.
Yeah, it seems to be to me. As soon as she muted, it stopped.
But we can't hear her now.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Is it still loud?
Yeah. Every time you talk, there's a background. So maybe I don't know. Maybe
you can try calling in.
Jimmy,
you have earphones?
I can share that your voice is coming across, but there is a background noise. So also if you maybe raise your voice, that might help as well.
I can definitely raise my voice, but I think, is the background noise still?
Yeah, it's
Jimmy, do you have
if you're
earphones?
Yeah.
That might help.
yeah.
I know I
earphone
have
mic.
issues like that too when I don't use my earphones.
Maybe while we're waiting for Chimmy,
Yeah,
do folks
Bernadette is right. Maybe it's the speaker.
Thank you.
if it's okay, while we're waiting for Chimmy, would folks want to just do really quick introductions just so we know who's all on the call, and then we'll keep going. Thanks for helping us during this little tech situation. Does anyone want to get started? Just a quick introduction about name, pronouns, who you are, and why you're coming to the call.
I'll start because I'm unmuted. It's Lee. I'm really interested in climate justice, and from the little that I know about this group that Push Buffalo, they've really done like super creative things and innovative things. So I just want to learn more. I'm with Mutual Aid Parkdale and one of the pod leaders and a member of PPE, and yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Anyone else want to go?
I can go. Hi, everyone. My name is Sonam. I use she and her pronouns. I have lived in Parkdale for 20 years now, so most of my life. I used to work for an organization called Students for Free Tibet Canada, and one of our biggest international campaigns was the Tibet climate justice issue. And so I have a little bit of experience talking about the types of issues that Tibetans inside Tibet face that has consequences for neighboring downstream countries. And then I was asked to join the Climate Justice Circle, the Parkdale Climate Justice Circle. And I'm also currently working as a community-based researcher with the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. And we probably won't go through everyone, but we're just going to keep filling the time until Chimmy calls back in. Please feel free also to introduce on the chat. Does anyone else want to go next? I think she's just trying to phone in right now.
Hi, this is Angela Elzinga Cheng. I'm a resident of Parkdale and I work at Green the City Environmental Organization. I'm really excited to hear from Push Buffalo because I feel like there could be, or there will be, a ton for us to learn from. So looking forward to hearing.
Amazing. And I think we've just been joined by Chimmy over the phone. Is that you?
Hi, folks. Can you hear me?
Yes. The only thing, Chimmy, you're going to have to mute your computer while you speak.
Perfect. Is this working now?
We did it. Well done.
Oh, apologies for these tech issues. Didn't face any of these issues yesterday during our community meeting. Unfortunate. However, let me continue. Thank you for filling in as well, Mercedes. I appreciate it. I believe we just finished with the land acknowledgement, but whenever we do the land acknowledgement, it's very important for me that we also personalize it and contextualize it. And so I want to acknowledge that today, this place is still home to many diverse First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities across the Turtle Island, and we are forever grateful to have the opportunity to share, live, and work on this land. So we'd also like to pay our respect to their elders of the past and present, and to any who may be here with us today physically, mentally, and spiritually as well. And just to quickly contextualize and personalize again, with the surreal times that we're in, I actually saw a tweet today by Bettina that shared how they're so struck about how many people don't realize that this situation of not being able to see their family for unfair reasons beyond their control is actually a reality for many, many immigrants. And that made me reflect on how, in relation to this land, the last residential school actually closed in 1996, which is just 24 years ago. And how many systems and institutions still exist today that continue to separate families and create barriers for Black, Indigenous, and people of color to live. And so with that being said, I wanted to move on with our community agreements. And as entities that exist on this Turtle Island, it's our collective responsibility to create a space that is inclusive and welcomes discussion. And so I'll continue reading the overview of our community agreement today. The PPE is dedicated to creating an equitable, diverse, and inclusive environment for all members of the neighborhood. Our meetings will intentionally build accessible and welcoming spaces for people of all races, genders, classes, abilities, ages, cultures, religions, and sexualities. We will not tolerate harassment of any form, including but not limited to racism, classism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, or any other oppressive language and behavior. If you witness or experience any harassment, please inform a member of the organizing team. And along with the overview, we always have some guidelines. I'll go over them quickly. But if you have any questions in regards to them or would like me to explain further, I'm more than happy to do so. So one diva, one mic, make space, take space. Please be mindful of time. This is my favorite. No one knows everything, but together we know a lot. Being aware of power and privilege, having patience and respect, and confidentiality. And a quick overview of the agenda. We did welcome an overview of the Zoom. We had some technical difficulties, apologies about that. And now we're at the agenda. We'll give you a quick overview of how this Climate Justice Circle came about. And then without further ado, we'll introduce Push Buffalo, followed by a Q&A period and next steps. So this partnership with T and Parkdale People's Economy really came about when we started exploring how can we accelerate climate justice through co-creation and community hubs. And the objectives that we came about was 1, building confidence and knowledge on climate solutions. 2, activating place-based priorities that link to climate action and being intentional with the places that we work with and the people that we work with. 3, developing and implementing local initiatives to advance climate justice. And to give you a little bit of background, I'll pass it on to Michael.
Hi, everyone. It's Michael Polani from Toronto Environmental Alliance. And I just wanted to say a little bit more about this project, which Chemi introduced. It's a 2-year project to support local action on climate justice in neighborhoods in Toronto. It's got some funding from the Atmospheric Fund and the Trillium Foundation. And Chimi mentioned the objectives for the project, and really just wanted to say that it's grounded in the belief and the recognition that the climate crisis is already impacting people's lives. It's disproportionately impacting Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities, and that those communities, those frontline communities, have often been excluded from the environmental movement and environmental activism and advocacy, and that very much there's a belief that the actions that are needed to address the climate crisis and transition to a lower carbon city and world are aligned with, and in many cases, the same actions that are needed to build more equitable and healthy communities. Actions like improving housing, transit, local jobs, food security, and democratic participation. So maybe just the next slide. So just to say that this project over the last 18 months, we've been focused on 3 areas. We've been supporting local learning by supporting trips to other community hubs that are doing amazing work on climate action and climate justice. And we have an amazing learning opportunity tonight to learn from another organization about their experiences. And we've been supporting some local initiatives that are aligned with Parkdale priorities in terms of advancing a super hub, a new hub that's a low carbon hub for the neighborhood, advancing initiatives to secure green jobs in Parkdale and improve low carbon affordable housing, and supporting other local climate projects that have been emerging as well, including bringing about more local community gardens in partnership with Greenest City and others. And then finally, the third piece is to really bring residents together and support resident interaction, learning, and capacity building to identify priorities for action that are related to climate justice and local priorities. And we started that process in February. Some of you were at the first Climate Justice Circle in February. There were about 30 people there. And we together identified priority issues that people wanted to learn more about and address. And the most mentioned issues were improving affordable transit, improving affordable housing, and advancing climate justice and Indigenous reconciliation. And so this tonight's session, next week's session on writing relations, and then the third session on a climate justice circle focused on action are all kind of next steps for this resident action. So looking forward to continuing to participate in this process with you. Thank you.
So I'll jump in. Hey everyone, just in case you don't know me, my name is Mercedes Sharp-Zayas and I work as the planning coordinator with the Parkdale People's Economy. A few years back, actually, the first time I really got to work in collaboration with Toronto Environmental Alliance as part of my role with Parkdale People's Economy, we actually had the opportunity to do a learning tour and go specifically to Buffalo, New York. And so this is where we were really first introduced to Push Buffalo. And part of the reason we're so excited to invite them in today to be able to share their insights. Push Buffalo's an amazing organization, and the work that they do has so many parallels with the work that's happening on the ground here in Parkdale. And I think what's really amazing about their work especially is that they take a theoretical concept, which they'll go into in a little bit, called just transition, which really thinks about how do we move from an economy that is extractive and that is exploitative towards one that is regenerative and caring. And they take that concept and they really put it into practice at the intersections of racial, economic, and climate justice. So just so incredibly grateful to have Push Buffalo join us today. And I'm gonna call on Brianna to come in now and to introduce herself. And once again, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Hello, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you so much for the people who are organizing this. I know there's a lot of sometimes unseen and reproductive labor that goes into making all of this happen. My name is Brianna. My pronouns are she and hers, and I'm also calling in from Buffalo, which is on occupied Haudenosaunee land. In a logistics way, I want to say that I also have a rambunctious 4-year-old with a thin door in between me and them. So that may come into play, as well as the people in my neighborhood who have very strong feelings against mufflers. So hopefully it still comes through pretty well. And if you need me to slow down or speak up or anything like that, please flag me or one of the organizers. So I'm the director of New Economy at Push Buffalo. And for me, it's been a pretty great journey because I moved to Buffalo about 11 years ago. And the first place that I was actually at Push. So it was way back in the beginnings when we were founded, just a few years after we were founded. And I saw, that side of Push emerging. And it really introduced me to everything that I'm involved in now, and is one of the main reasons that we stayed in Buffalo and put down roots here. So about 1.5 years ago, I came back to Push Buffalo after working at other nonprofits as the director of New Economy. Push has been doing New Economy work for a while, but had finally sort of gathered things together enough to make a position and a department that would really give some extra energy behind the work. So I'm really happy about that. We also are doing it in what we are hoping for is a new economy practice within an organization that still has some traditional hierarchy. And so I actually have a co-director who's the director of cooperative development, and we've been figuring out that path for the last year and a half, and it's so much better than just being a director on my own. And it's been really great to be practicing that together and with our team. So yeah, a little tiny bit about Buffalo. We are one of the largest cities in the US. We're the second largest city in New York, but we are the sixth poorest in that category across the nation. And we're also extremely segregated geographically and socially and in a lot of other ways. So there's definitely a lot of issues that are going on. We have a lot of very old built infrastructure and housing. So there's a lot of issues going on with climate justice there, and as well as pollution. We were a large site for manufacturing, and when those jobs left, it really took a lot out of the city. It's part of what we call the Rust Belt, where there was a lot of machinery, and then once those jobs weren't there anymore, there's a lot of rusting and abandoned buildings and factories and really polluted history, like in our land and in our people. We also are on the watershed, the Niagara River watershed, and connected to the Great Lakes. And so that has a lot of meaning for us and helps define a lot of what our activities and solutions are based around. One of our projects in particular is around water, because we deal with combined sewer overflow events when there's heavy rain, because our rainwater and our sewage water go into the same systems. So I already got an amazing introduction with our mission and a lot of what we do. So I just want to go a little bit more into that. One of the beliefs that comes out in our mission and in our work, as was mentioned, is that you have to look at social and economic and environmental justice together. And so it makes us sometimes a bit of an odd organization altogether, because there's a lot of groups that work on one of those things or possibly two, but all three starts to get really unwieldy. But we also find that's where there's the most power and the most sense making, when we're really holding on and saying, no, these are interconnected and we need to be addressing all of them every time we're looking for a solution. Also, we want to see a new economy, as was mentioned, and I'll get into a little bit more of what that means. But for us, when we say new, that's really to differentiate that we don't believe the current system can be fixed and we need a new one. And it's not to say that any of our ideas are new in any way. In fact, a lot of the ideas we have, we're very consciously recognizing are coming from a lot of indigenous cultures, and particularly cultures from the African diaspora, that we're really drawing a lot of that wisdom into what we're doing, along with people from those backgrounds. And so I think that's really important to know when we're trying to practice the future together, to borrow another good phrase that I like. And yeah, I just hope that in talking a little bit about kind of what we've done on the ground, that sort of what works will be really helpful learning for people. And as much as possible, I want to also throw in what hasn't worked, or what we wish had worked better or faster or in a different way, because I think that's very important too. Like, we've done amazing things, but we've also had so much messiness internally, and so many deflated hopes externally and things like that. So I hope that can also be a helpful learning, that we haven't arrived in any sense and never will, but just whatever has happened along the way, I hope can really help. So could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So one of the ways I wanted to frame this is that we've identified a certain very specific border to what we call the green development zone, which just means the area where we're focusing our more physical work, particularly things like affordable housing and green infrastructure. And so that for us is a really important concept and decision on our part, that while there are things that we do that, will serve everyone in Buffalo or outside of it, like when we're getting people training for good jobs, there's, in terms of our physical work, we're really very rooted in one place. And that's where we can see the most benefit, because that's as much as we can really know and really sit and say we know what we want where we live. And also when it's concentrated in one place, you start to see the benefits and you start to be able to imagine, what if this was the new normal, and what if this was what everywhere looked like, when you're seeing, solar and community gardens and affordable housing and all the other things that we want to see all in one place. Then we hope there's some universal learnings that people can pull away from that, but then, take those learnings and really root them deep in their own context, which is going to be so different than ours, even in other parts of Buffalo, let alone in, the rest of the state or country or internationally. So for us, it's very important to have that rootedness in place in people. Kind of what we do within this zone is really three things. We do community organizing. Oh, sorry, we can stay on the same slide. We do community organizing, we do policy, and we do implementation. And those three things ideally work very strongly together, and can be really powerful for getting change done when they are all somewhat coordinated in one place, in addition to a lot of coalition work and collaboration with other people who have different strengths than what we have. So just a quick example of how that can look. A while ago, back when I was getting started at Push, we did a campaign against National Fuel, who had a pot of money that it was wanting to reserve for itself and then do rate hikes. And so we did a lot of community organizing to get people knowledgeable about it, and to get a lot of people power and do direct actions, and really do a lot of campaigning saying that that wasn't what we wanted to happen with it. So that's a lot of our organizing piece, and that's how actually a lot of people came into Push, was on this campaign. And then the policy piece of it is that we had to articulate what exact solution that we wanted that would fit within the categories, but would also get us what we needed. Getting that benefit drawn down to our communities who are facing excessive utility burdens, partly because of our older housing stock and how it was built in a different way. We have a lot of people who are paying in utilities maybe half the amount that they're paying in rent, or maybe up to the same amount that they're paying in rent, particularly in the colder months. So it's really a huge issue. And so it was something that was really easy for people to get behind. So we had to articulate a policy that would bring that back and actually help people who were dealing with that. So then the third piece is implementation, right? It's really good to do the organizing and show up. It's really good to do the policy and actually win, which we did. But then what happens afterwards, and that's a lot of times where things can fall apart more, particularly when you're going against a really big organization or feature of our economy. There's so much about our economy that is a self-healing system where we can get a splinter in there, but it's just gonna close over it and absorb it, and eventually, after some irritation, get back to the status quo. And so the implementation, we think, is a really important piece for making sure that we can hold on to those wins and not get entirely back to the status quo. So for us, implementation looked like being able to, have that pot of money available for low-income homeowners who were able to get weatherization of their homes so that they would not have such high utility bills, and also jobs training so that the new and increased jobs of people doing things like energy auditing in order to to have these happen would go to people in our community. So we did the jobs training for those positions, and we were the organization that was connecting, finding people who qualified and connecting them to this resource to make sure they were actually getting it. And so in that way, it was like the perfect system of how those three go together. But there's a lot about it that I think we could do differently. And particularly in the implementation, it was just a really big struggle to see a lot of the weatherization jobs going to places that were not having people's best interests at heart and were not supportive of diversity or inclusion in any way, either on their workforce or in the houses that they served. And so we still ran into a lot of barriers when it came to implementation. I think that'll do for this slide, and I'll go to the next one. Thank you. So just talking a little bit about who we are. PUSH is a membership organization, and when we started, and it was mostly members with only a handful of staff, members did a lot more of the work of PUSH, whereas over the last several years, we've had a lot more ability to hire staff to do the work, and that's been an internal tension that we've been navigating. How are we able to be more technical, which gives us more power to actually change the systems and actually get bigger wins, but how do we do that without becoming technocratic and having, recreating systems of oppression where only, educated and people who fit a lot of this like white supremacist sort of ideals are able to succeed. And so that's something we're always aware of and working on. It's something sorry. I am not going to be the best person to define technocratic, but I know that when we use it, it's sort of like in like a bureaucratic or authoritarian, or like it's sort of like a system where the only way to participate is to be at this like very high technical level, and it doesn't allow for like a lot of people to bring a lot of different knowledge to a solution or a problem. It's like a way of excluding people from that unless you speak a certain language, which isn't even necessarily the one that needs speaking, but people think that it is. And sorry, I won't always catch the chat when I'm going on. So if I don't, please bring it up. So we have usually between 200 and 400 active members, depending on, when we're looking at it. And we have monthly member meetings and also an annual meeting where they do a lot of presentations and elections and things like that. And we try to make sure that the members are really the strongest voice that we have, even if they're not doing as much of the work, that there's still a really high representation on our board. We have it in our bylaws, and I don't know that I'll get it exactly right, but it's 75% of our board at all times has to be based in PUSH membership and members of disadvantaged communities. And I think we have something like 100% that are impacted in some way by the things that we're working on. So I think that is very important. We have that level, and then a lot of our staff come from our member base, and then we also have a lot of member committees, or not a lot, but several very key active member committees. And so that's sort of how we are still keeping that in the organization, even as we have more staff. And so we're really, working through a lot of the phrases that we have learned from our partners in the movement. Things like I mentioned, we know what we want where we live, and the people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution, and really making sure that we're taking that everywhere that we go, regardless of whether our members are physically there or not. And so most of our members are based on a particular part of Buffalo's west side, a particular zip code, and this zip code, since really it's been around, has been a diverse immigrant neighborhood for Buffalo that looked like a lot of Italian immigrants, and then it's moved more closer to the millennium with a lot of Puerto Ricans who obviously are Americans, but just culturally they're a very, very, very strong presence on the West Side. And then there's since 2000, Buffalo has become one of the main cities for refugee resettlement, actually in the whole country. And so that's something that, at least until the last few years when numbers have dropped off because of our administration, that's something that has been a huge factor in Buffalo, particularly as a city that has been losing population. Having refugee resettlement in the city has been the first time that we've stopped or slowed or turned around the population loss coming in. And they're definitely very concentrated in this West Side area. So we have over 50 languages that are spoken just in our green development zone. And it's just really incredible seeing, you know, we have a lot of the streets are different, the businesses are different, and it's been really incredible. That was one of the nonprofits that I was at, was very involved in that. So, and then the next was also very involved in the more commercial strip side of things with economic development. And so altogether, we have the most diverse zip code outside of Queens and New York City. We're like the second. So it's a really incredible area. We're also called the City of Good Neighbors, which, you know, sometimes like your moniker of your city can not mean very much, or not a lot of people know it. But in Buffalo, most people know it, and it's a very important part. It's like something that's brought up daily or weekly about the story that we tell ourselves. And certainly it's brought up when we are not living up to that, as we very often don't. But yeah, it's definitely something that we try to live up to and is part of our ideas. I think I'm good for the next slide. So this is the Just Transition framework that was mentioned, and was really created by our partners, Movement Generation, and we do a lot of trainings back and forth with them. They're incredibly inspiring and just very good at putting clear just details and phrases to some of the things that we're thinking about. And so, you know, as was mentioned, their analysis that we share is that on the left side, you see we have an extractive economy. And I know that the tinier words we won't be able to read on this presentation, but I'm sure it can be shared out. And, you know, also the very amazing 14-page zine that they've done to kind of really dig into this is really, really good and really worthwhile. But just so we can see the larger kind of frame of this, the extractive economy, all the different pieces work together towards the purpose of enclosing wealth and power. And in doing so, using like a dig, burn, dump kind of way of working, and extracting from the planet and the people, and just in every way, like that's how it works. And what we want on the right side is an economy that is regenerative and is always regenerating people and the planet. And it's working towards a purpose of ecological and social well-being. So that's where we have that, you know, what you do to the people, you do to the planet, and vice versa, that those are inextricably linked. But if we organized our economy and society around the well-being of both of those things, we would be in a much better place. We would be on our way, and there's different ways we think we can work towards that. And so obviously we're not there, and there's a big gap in between. And so the middle just talks a little bit about more specific strategies. And that's kind of where the work that Push does and that, you know, this group does, it finds ourselves at any point. We're stopping the bad, we're building the new, we're trying to divest from the things that we don't want to see more of and invest in the things we do want to see more of. And we're doing it, you know, through legislation, through money. We're doing it through a values filter where we're always centering impacted communities and BIPOC voices and things like that. So this is just like a really helpful tool. When I first came across it, it was just amazing to feel like there were words and concepts that were expressing a lot of, you know, the things that I had felt and the work that I'd been doing. So hopefully this can be a helpful tool, and I'd love to get into it at another time or moment when we're interacting. I think one of the things that I really like about this when it's applied to our work is, and this is partly my own background, but one of the reasons that I'm at Push is that I want to be working on the roots of problems, but in a way that is very local. And so what this lens does is show the root being money and the economy and how that's organized, and really that a lot of other social movements who have had a lot of demands and have seen this very clearly and said, like, we need legislative wins, we need economic wins, we need social wins. They got a lot more of the legislative and social wins that, you know, affected the status quo but didn't totally dismantle it. And where they stopped short were always in economic demands. Those are the ones that weren't granted. And so we don't want to have what we're doing fall short. We want to make sure that that piece is closed, because that's where we actually see a lot of change. And also for us, you know, we're looking at how the small wins can always be leading towards or leveraging or contributing towards the larger wins. And we don't want to get caught up or distracted in the smaller wins, although we celebrate them. So, you know, for example, Cooperation Buffalo is a separate organization that's under the umbrella of Push. And one of the things that they do is try to help start or convert or support worker cooperatives in Buffalo that are majority owned by members of disadvantaged communities. And so for them, seeing a co-op start and succeed is definitely this amazing win, but they don't exist to start co-ops, you know, like that's not at all the point of it. The point of it is to actually do concrete things that move wealth into the hands of the community, that increase our community control over our own economy, and that lead towards being able to see that happen, not just where we are, but everywhere. You know, like that's actually the goal. And worker cooperatives are one of the best ways to get there. But if there is a better way in the future, you know, if things change, like it's not about the cooperatives, it's about that end goal. And so I think this helps us to really focus on that too. They talk in the scene about economy being the management of home when you look at the actual roots of the word. And I think that really helps when we look at how can we do things on a local level that are networked to get up to the actual like national and world level change that we want to see. Next slide, please. So I wanted to go through a few concrete examples. I kind of decided to pick one from the past, one that we're in the middle of, and one that we're planning. So a past example is School 77. This was a Buffalo public school that was closed and sat vacant for several years in the middle of our neighborhood. And some speculative developers were wanting to turn it into like high-end luxury apartment lofts. And so Push did a lot of community organizing and agitation around that, saying, we really don't think that that's going to be serving our community. In fact, we see that as a powerful force that will send our community away because we won't be able to afford to live in our neighborhood anymore. And this, you know, this building was such a community asset for us in the past. How can it be one moving forward? You know, how can we develop it in a way that still is feeding our community and helping us to stay rather than pushing us out? And so we did a lot of community events, but gathered over 800 actual feedback cards that we were able to present, and it was very convincing, which is great. And then what the elected officials and other people we were talking to said was, great, so you do something with it. And it was a much bigger project than anything we'd done before. We do develop affordable housing, but this was huge. And we did it, and it was a several year, very difficult endeavor. And what we ended up doing was taking the basement and first floor to be spaces for community organizations. So that's where Push's main offices are now. But we also have an after school program that's in there. And then also a community theater that's a collective that focuses on lifting up the work of Black authors and playwrights and actors. So there's a lot of different ways that space is used all throughout the days, as well as having a community room and a gym that's open to youth in the community. And then the top 2 floors are converted into 30 units of affordable housing for senior citizens who are low income. And also, while we were creating all of this, we did historical preservation to keep a lot of the character of the school. There's like blackboards behind our desks and things like that. And we put in the first 100% low income dedicated community solar in New York State. That was commissioned in 2018. And we have a lot of features like all native plants on the grounds and a lot of green infrastructure, including a green roof that's actually accessible for people to go out and sit around and things like that. So we were really trying to do this in the way that we want to see it happen. We had an agreement where we were able to employ workforce. So that's what the picture is. One of my coworkers and someone else that we worked with in the past actually were hired for the duration of the project to be general labor and then to install the solar panels on the top of the roof. So they were able to do that and then move on to another project because the developers who were doing it had such a good experience. So we were trying to do this like in the way that we want to see it happen. Yeah, and then we're just trying to make sure that we're still using this as a community asset. That charge has really never left us. So particularly since we've all been remote since March, we're hoping that we can continue to have this be this active, helpful space. One of the ways that we did that was we did launch a mutual aid hub in partnership with Buffalo Mutual Aid Network and several others. And we ended up having 3 days a week, people being able to come in for free and barrier-free, no questions asked groceries. That was all volunteer run and things like that. So that's something that we did for the spring and summer and have closed down and are focusing more on our advocacy. But the gym, we're working with partners on still using that and just making sure that it's still available, particularly for things like we're all struggling with remote learning with our students, and particularly people who do not have very privileged jobs where they can be home or have a lot of supports. And so making sure that that's available for things like that, because I know Wi-Fi access is still a huge gap in Buffalo. That's one of those things that, you either have it or don't, and there's huge impacts on your ability to work a job or be in school or anything like that. It's just really problematic. I think we're good for the next slide. So for a current example that we're in the thick of right now, we have been developing affordable housing on the west side pretty much since we started, housing and jobs, particularly with that environmental justice lens have really, it's been the focus for us and continues to be. We currently have over 100 units of affordable housing that are built that we manage. And then this new project is by far our most ambitious. I guess School 77 didn't teach us a lesson, because this project is due to be, it's changed slightly. I think we've ended up at 49 units of affordable housing, and it's on scattered sites. It's over 11 sites, so pretty complicated. And we also are setting ourselves the goal of this being our most green project yet. I mean, we were the first people to build a net zero residential house in Buffalo when we did that several years ago. And now that's become a lot more common. This project we're looking to do all to passive house and net zero standards, which I know are super jargony, but mostly mean that they'll have a really well insulated building, and that they'll try to generate as much electricity on site as they consume, so that their impact is, kind of leveled out. We're also going to be incorporating supportive housing into the units, which is just housing that we do together with a partner, that's reserved for people who are either experiencing homelessness or at risk of that, and who have a mental health diagnosis and substance abuse issues and things like that. So around 30% of the units are going to be dedicated for that. And we're also hoping, that we'll have solar on most of the buildings that'll help with generating electricity. And we're hoping to be able to build the entire project with no gas infrastructure at all, even as a backup. We're just going to be using clean heating and cooling technologies, like ground and air source heat pumps that can do the heating and cooling, but they're on the electrical grid rather than being gas. So that's a lot. And one of the things I thought has just been really interesting this past year that might be a good learning is we had done a good amount of community engagement when we were first planning this, and then coming back, with designs and things ready to do more community engagement, we had particularly a few people who'd moved into the neighborhood since then, and who were very concerned with the project and really didn't want to see like multi-family unit houses. Most of Buffalo, we have old houses that are particularly traditional Buffalo doubles, where it's just an apartment on top and below, and that's sort of like the most standard unit that you see, particularly in this area. And so to see anything that would hold, 4 or 6 or 8, was more than they wanted to see. And they had also just been dealing with a tragedy in the community where a young child had been hit by a car and died on the street that we were holding the community meeting on. And so they said really strongly that they didn't want buildings quite as big, and that they wanted one of the buildings to not be built at all, and to have that space be either green space or something that could be used for the children. And so we ended up changing that. And it sounds like a small thing, but we were pretty far along and had already submitted some applications. And so we just completely got rid of the one building, and we reduced the size of the other one. And we're committed to working with the neighborhood on making that lot into something that is available for them and the youth. And that was really a tough decision-making process as that whole thing was playing out, but something we felt really strongly was a values decision for us, that, we have over 600 people on our waiting list. So we want to get as many units built as possible, particularly as our neighborhood is gentrifying very quickly, regardless of what we do. But it was better for us to be really listening to the community and building something for the next 100 years that was really wanted, rather than, just forging ahead. So that was something where we changed. Next slide, please. And sorry, I'm not able to see the time, but hopefully I'm almost done. So hopefully we're about on time. So a future example that I'm very excited about is our commercial corridor in the area is, you know, just one street. It's very, very small shops. This is a picture that's just taken looking from our community center across the street. And this is another area that it hasn't gotten too expensive as quickly as the residential side has, but it's getting there. And this is also in our expanded green development zone. And so this is where we're going to focus a lot of our attention. And when we look at buying buildings and things like that, looking at acquiring pieces here and doing a lot of work here. So we're hoping to do a citizen planning school in the spring and really come build on that over the summer with some college like paid interns who will help us with creating this community plan that will then be our basis, but we're hoping that it will also, we're going to be pushing it on our elected officials and city council members that they either use it or at least base anything that they're going to do on that feedback that has been gained from the neighborhood. And we're also looking at new models for us when we are acquiring and developing and owning the buildings, because we've mostly taken advantage of larger government grants and tax credits and things like that for affordable housing that are very restrictive and have a lot of like deed and ownership restrictions that go for 15 years and some for 30 years. And just if we're wanting to have the community more involved in owning, that's probably not going to be the best source. And so really looking for more creative ways to do that with some of our things that we buy, like a real estate cooperative or a commercial community land trust or things like that. Push, a lot of our work has actually been establishing a land trust in Buffalo, but it's not under Push and it's not in our neighborhood. It's with our compatriots who are on the east side who are facing very rapid gentrification, and that has won some amazing battles just from like starting at the grassroots level, going all the way up to, I think last year they were able to get the city to transfer lots to them at no cost, which is absolutely unheard of for any reason whatsoever. And they were able to start building. And so just like looking on social media, even in the last few days, they're like wrapping, you know, one of the first houses that's going to be there as part of their land trust and things like that. So just seeing more of that happen here. There's also some credit unions that are on this street, and we're wanting to work more with on some of our ideas that again other people in other places have already been well established for more non-extractive lending and more equitable ways to bank or to access money. And so just kind of really building on things like that and getting again more community control of our local economy, but particularly looking at this commercial and mixed use area as one of the ways that we're going to be doing some more cooperative ownership structures and things like that there. I think we're good for the next slide, and I think it's actually on to Q&A. And yeah, so I know there's some guided questions, and hopefully I'll be able to slip in whatever I forgot, because I'm sure there's a lot.
Thank you so much, Brianna, for that wonderful presentation. I was just taking notes and I'm like trying to keep up, and I'm sure there was so much information that everybody was trying to keep track of. We'd be more than happy to share this recording to folks after our session. So if you didn't get a chance to take as many notes, don't worry. Where do I start? You know, from all of the pillars and the work of areas of work you mentioned, I think one thing that really stuck to me was the current example that you spoke of, where you folks were into the project and, you know, you came back to your true intentions of why you do this and back to your values of being community driven. And the decision that you made, I'm sure, was very hard, especially after the work that you have folks had put in. But thank you really, Brianna, for joining us and sharing your experiences with Push Buffalo. So we have some guided questions. I'll start off with the first one, and I have members of our advisory committee will be joining us and asking the rest of the questions as well. So first question is, how did Push Buffalo manage to build into such a large organization that has been able to have a widespread impact in the community?
Yeah, thanks for that. So we went from the original 2 organizers 15 years ago to now we're generally around 30 staff in 15 years. So it's slow and steady, and now we're on the more medium size of nonprofits. And I think there's a lot of reasons, and there's good reasons, like we are just doing very compelling work and we're putting community leaders in front, and really holding to that and rejecting false solutions and just bringing people to the decisions that affect them. And I think that, has definitely helped. I also definitely need to say that Push is scaling or like growing bigger at a certain pace has had a lot to do with the existing systems that we call the nonprofit industrial complex, kind of referencing the military or prison industrial complexes that are just these massive monoliths that use money and resources generally in a really terrible way. I don't know if, because you're in this work, we're probably reading a lot of the same things and having a lot of the same conversations, but some really great books and speakers that I've enjoyed. One is Winners Take All, and another is Decolonizing Philanthropy, or sorry, Decolonizing Wealth, right? And then now I'm forgetting. I'll look it up to make sure I haven't messed it up. But those are some really good perspectives on how, a lot of the wealth that goes into good causes has been 2 or 3 times over stolen from people. It's based on stolen land, labor, and lives. And that then as they're seeing how they're going to give it back into the community for like whatever the good is, a lot of the benefit, if not for, laundering their reputation, at the very least, it is still controlling what solutions can be brought and which people will be resourced. And there's a lot of, both anecdotal and other data on, a lot of dollars are not going to particularly Black and BIPOC-led organizations. Sorry, BIPOC, which I know people have used here, but Black, Indigenous, and people of color-led organizations, queer-led organizations, and things like that. Primarily, you're going to see the biggest resources, and particularly the resources with the least strings attached, going to places that can enter this very, white supremacist idealized space that's it's the technocratic, it's the very like super highly educated and connected personally. And so while we're not entirely there, one of our founders is a, white cis male Harvard graduate and was able to, really speak in those circles in a way that gained trust. And then once you have some trust, you can build that trust and build it. So like the places that are seen as worthy of trust are like continued to be resourced, whereas the places that are seen as needing to prove themselves never get the resources to be able to do that. And a lot of that has to do with the systems of oppression and privilege that we're interacting with. So I think it's a little convoluted way to answer the question. Basically, I think a lot of it being, really hard work and people power, and the other part being, we were able to use our privilege to navigate into this very questionable nonprofit arena that is very beneficial in a lot of ways and having a lot of impact, but is also very hampering in other ways from some of our much more revolutionary hopes. And so, we just are trying to do the best we can to be very acknowledging that and seeing, okay, we have our foot in the door. We've wedged our shoulder inside this door. How can we hold it open for other people? And also, to use the metaphor, yell at the people inside to open the door further. And so we're trying to do that in very concrete ways by acting as fiscal sponsors for smaller organizations. We very rarely will write a grant that we haven't written a smaller organization into in a non-burdensome way, where we're just getting more of the funds to them. And, you know, just trying to do things like that, as well as really organizing funders to be like, these systems are not good and healthy and they can't continue. And we have a little bit of a stronger place to say that without as much backlash as than some places that are really struggling. I don't know if you guys say this on Zoom, or sorry, you folks say this on Zoom, but we'll often say check when we're done. Otherwise we're like not sure.
Thank you so much, Brianna, for that wonderful all-rounded answer, and really appreciate your honesty and transparency as well, I think. Yeah. I don't want to take up too much time, but we'll move on to the second question. Can I invite Sonam Chuki, who's one of the members of our Climate Justice Advisory Circle, to ask the second question?
Thank you, Chimi. Thank you, Brianna. I echo everything Chimi said. I was one of the people that was frantically taking notes. It was so interesting, everything you're saying. I'm so glad this is being recorded so I can watch it again. My question, so the question itself is quite general, so I'm gonna kind of make it more specific after I ask. But the question is, what strategies or approaches does Push Buffalo use to try to ensure that its work advances economic and racial justice and also helps address the climate crisis? I know that's a big question, and I think a lot of your presentation did cover a lot of these things. I think something that really kind of resonated with me is what you just spoke about just now in response to Chimi's first question, which is the nonprofit industrial complex. So I know that for people that aren't from this world, people like to sort of generalize as if all nonprofits are the same. The nonprofit I worked at, I was the only staff. And then we know that there are huge nonprofits like Greenpeace that have hundreds of staff all around the world. So I'd be interested in sort of hearing more about how that's changed the dynamics for the work at Push, going from 2 staff to 30 staff.
Yeah, I think some of it I mentioned in that there's just always that tension of like, what is our identity and what sort of almost percentages of, you know, things do we have in terms of like, we need people who are lawyers to be advocating for tenants in housing court, and we need people who are from the community to be talking to tenants and getting their stories. And how do those combine? Can the same person hold both those roles, or are they two? Or, you know, like, how do we do that, especially on limited resources? And so, yeah, I think that trying to continue to go back to our mission and really back to our membership, like over and over. It's almost like a practice for us, including, you know, everyone in whatever role you do, whether you're more forward facing or not, and whatever your hierarchy is, that just you're spending time knocking on doors. When I started 11 years ago in my other role, I was supposed to be running the community center, and, you know, I showed up expecting, like, I have a background in this a little bit, you know, and so like, okay, like, you know, here's what I'm expecting for my first day. And they were like, oh no, you're going canvassing for a week. And I was like, what? And they were like, this is Push. Like, you don't get to be involved in our community center when you're, you know, through no fault of your own, new to Buffalo and new to our neighborhood. Like, we're going door knocking. I was like, okay. And so, yeah, I think that staying true to that is very important. And then I think especially when we look at, you know, where these intersect, a lot of it is talking to people about the things that are really immediate needs, and being able to give a little bit more of that analysis and that connection, so that particularly things like climate and environment are suddenly, there's like that light bulb of like, this is just as urgent, you know, in a lot of ways as like my heating bill or my unemployment or whatever, like that they're connected. All these things that we need are really connected. So helping those to be a lot more urgent. And then I think kind of like two sides of something is, we're in all these multiple spaces, right? And so when we're in the spaces that are more traditional, like affordable housing, bringing environment and climate really strongly into that and saying, no, this has to be just as important and we will not be settling for less. And affordable housing deserves to have these green technologies just as much as anywhere else, and it's going to be done in an affordable way. Like it's not going to be an out of reach kind of thing. So I think that's very valuable. And then on the other side of places that we're in, when we're with more traditional environmental organizations, I think it's very important that we're coming in and like speaking truth to power and being as radical as possible and centering a lot of the social and economic justice in those conversations, because it's too easily lost, or not even lost, but like glossed over or treated in an academic way, where we're at convening sometimes of like some of these bigger conversations that we're having in the US, like the Green New Deal and things like that. And in these spaces, there's just such a disconnect from people on the ground who are the most impacted. And there's such a belief in a lot of these neoliberal, like what we would call false solutions, market solutions, like, the way to fix this is more technology, or like whatever, like things like that are just really missing the point. So for us to be able to be bringing community front and center there and rejecting and holding out the false solutions, it means we're really not popular in a lot of places, but I think is helpful. Wherever we are, we're trying to shout whatever the thing is that most needs to be heard. And sorry, I think I'm taking too long answering the question, so I'm going to stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. I'm going to call upon Vicky Oser, who is also a member of our Climate Justice Advisory Committee.
Hi everyone, I'm Vicky. I'm a high school student and I go to Parkdale Collegiate. My pronouns are she and her. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little more on your organization's food justice work.
Thank you. Yeah, this is has a special place in my heart because I do a lot of volunteering and organizing and stuff that outside of Push, and the place that I've been the most deeply involved in for a long time is an organization that's very community led, that does work particularly with community gardens. And so it just Push has been involved in those things, but I think especially recently has been doing more and more, or finding more like practical ways to connect rather than just like, yeah, you rock of like some of our partners. So that's been really exciting. I think a couple of examples. One is that when we were doing a lot of our initial development more than 10 years ago, we set aside 2 community gardens that have been extremely, extremely active this entire time. They're always completely full and just completely, well taken care of. And in that neighborhood, they're primarily, the beds are primarily worked by Karen Burmese and other people generally who are coming out of Burma. And they just do a ton with food. So it's been really amazing to see that be this great resource. We also have one of our affordable commercial spaces. A few years ago, we helped to both, start renting to this place, but also give them support outside because they were just getting started and were kind of a passion project. But it's the first halal food pantry in Buffalo. And so that's really meeting a huge need in our neighborhood. And they also do a lot with like cultural organizing and healthy living and things like that. So to be able to host that affordably in one of our buildings and pass on, you know, volunteer support and monetary support and things like that has been really helpful, especially as they've just expanded a lot based on the need in the COVID pandemic. Also, there's the mutual aid hub that I mentioned before, where we were just bulk purchasing food and storing it and giving it out to people because that was just such a huge immediate need with a ton of people being thrown off of work and things like that. We also are try to do small things, you know, like just in our work, having that lens of like, if we have a meeting, we should have hot food and we should have the ability to take it away and we should have canned goods and things like that. Just always thinking with like food insecurity in mind. Also, since COVID, we have been part of a group called Seeding Resilience, which is a coalition that's hoping to work all up and down the food system locally to have more resilience and connection and equity and self-determination, particularly in light of COVID and a lot of the systems that were not working before but are really not working now. And so just offering them what we have, which is land. We have one half functioning greenhouse and a vacant property, or I shouldn't say vacant, a property we have set aside as permanent green space that we will never develop, that has been many different things in its history, including a community garden at one point and like rain garden and other things. So that has been slower to develop because I think everyone was trying to figure out what they were doing before taking on something additional, but just being open to things like that has been really important, and just seeing it as intersectional. And we still partner with people who do like mobile pantries and things like that in our parking lot. Again, I don't want to go on too long, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Brianna, for touching on all of the community gardens and things that are close to your heart, because those are exactly the same, very similar initiatives that, you know, are taking place here in Parkdale. And I'm so proud to say that 3 of our advisory committee members are actually, 2 of them are working in the Milky Way gardens, so Sonam and Shobha. And we also have Naomi, who's working at our local elementary school's rooftop garden that was just recently started. And so it's so great to have them as part of our team. And so moving on to the next question, we have, yeah, here it is. So the question that we have planned is, does Push Buffalo work in solidarity with Indigenous people? And tell us about any steps that your organization has taken to build relationship with settler and Indigenous communities or organizers in your region. And before I continue, I was just going to ask if Peter, who earlier asked a question in the chat in relation to the Indigenous community, maybe I can open the space for Peter to ask his question if he'd like to add on to it. Hi, Peter. I'm going to give him a moment, and if not, maybe I can ask the question in addition to this, if that's okay with you, Brianna. So Peter earlier in the chat mentioned, how large a presence is the Indigenous communities in Buffalo, and how engaged are they with allies?
Thank you for both of those. I'll do my best with both of them, and also refer to people who I think have more up-to-date and super accurate knowledge on it. To me, I feel like there is a pretty strong presence, but I don't know if that's just because from the beginning the beginning of my time in Buffalo, I started out on the west side and with Push Buffalo. So I don't know if how that carries across other experiences. On the west side, we have a Native American magnet school. We also have Native American community services, and they're really the hub and spokespeople in a lot of ways particularly when we're talking about between settler and indigenous communities. That's really a lot of the work that they've chosen to take on. We obviously have a lot of tribes in the area, but at least as far as I know, there's been a lot less communication back and forth, and there's been a lot more like internal organizing. So in terms of push and what we do and some others in Buffalo do, this is definitely something that we have had a lens on, but have been challenged in the last few years to really be pushing more on and bringing to the front more and more. And so that's something that we're still getting better at. I don't know if you heard that enormous crash. And so primarily through, I'll probably accidentally keep saying NACS because Native American Community Services is just known by that acronym NACS in the community, primarily through their staff and their executive director, who's very, well established and very active. We've been in a lot of partnerships and coalitions. And so we're in one that's very active right now that is taking on this work as like a central piece of what they're doing, and have done some good trainings about it already. The executive director had led 2 workshops already on like good minds. And so we've done that. And then as part of our statewide coalition, New York Renews, that's also something they're taking on, but in a more coordinated way across all of New York State. And yeah, I'm trying to think of, I know there's more that we've done. Oh, one of the things we did locally, which again, NACS offered and Push just jumped at the chance for, was something called the blanket exercise. And I don't know how much it's spread or is widely used, but that's something that they had gotten some funding to do. And so we offered it to Push staff. It's all day on a Saturday, and I think we had almost half of our staff there, and it was a really amazing and just very generous exercise for them to do and hold all of that they processing that a lot of settler people needed to do that they didn't need to hold for sure. So yeah, we've done that. And then one of the things that I'm super excited about, it's mostly through the local coalition, but they're working on how we can establish a Buffalo version of the Freedom Schools that the Black Panther Party has done, decades ago. And that's something that NACS is taking a really primary role in. And so some of the other organizations are stepping back a little and making sure that the first and strongest resources are going to particularly BIPOC-led communities and for the benefit of BIPOC families and children who are really struggling with the virtual learning that we're all doing. Again, I'm worried I'm going on, so I'm gonna check there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brianna. With our Climate Justice Circle, like one of the main emerging themes was how can we ground our climate justice work in solidarity with Indigenous communities, and also to learn about writing relations along with, working with learning from organizations like Push. So we're really excited that our next session actually on December 1st, sorry, I'm doing a quick shameless plug already. It's on December 1st, and we're going to be hosting Josh Trucros, who will be really talking about the writing relations framework and climate justice work in solidarity with Indigenous communities. With that being said, I think we want to open up the floor for Q&As. And I believe, Brianna, you also have a question for us. Maybe I could give you the mic for the question, and then we can open up the questions open up the floor for Q&A after.
Thank you. I forgot about that. Yeah, I just was wondering, particularly as, a group and community that is just already so embedded and so far along in all of these similar things. in your work, what would be one thing that would just be completely game changing? Like it would break open the box, it would rewrite the rules, it would just, it would allow so many other things to like flow in through it if that, that barrier was gone or that resource was provided. Also, no pressure to answer that question if you have a totally different question.
Thank you. I'm going to open the floor for any of our participants who are here with us today. If you'd like to take on Brianna's question, and feel free to raise your hand on the number 3 button. I'd also like to make some space for our advisory committee members if you'd like to share your thoughts on Brianna's question. And for folks who may not have heard, it's the question is also in the chat box. Yeah, of course. I believe we have Tenzin Organ who would like to share. Please unmute yourself, Tenzin Organ.
Can I volunteer in your programs?
Sorry, Tenzin Organ, I don't think we heard.
Am I allowed to volunteer to your programs?
Oh, you're interested in volunteering with us? For sure, 100%. Oh, thank you. For sure. We'll contact you after this call, and we'll find ways for you to get involved. I believe, Peter, you have your hand up.
Thank you.
Please go ahead, Peter. Thank you again. Peter, are you able to? Peter, we can't hear you for some reason.
Peter's one room over. I'm going to put on my mask and let him in, and you can ask the question right here. Okay, one second.
I don't know why it's not working.
No worries, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. I think Brianna actually said something earlier that's, I think, really important when she was talking about the school renovation. We have to be realistic about where power lies in our communities. And if you can get your local municipal government on side to a greater or lesser extent, it makes things so much easier. So finding ways to allow them to join your dream is a really great way to get the power to flow to you. So often we work in opposition, and opposition is full of conflict, and most people see opposition as a zero-sum game. So if you can get people to buy into a vision of that's shared, that they can feel is a win for them, that's a way to I think, get things going much quicker. And I'll give you just a quick example from us here at Park. This year, we took over a building with over 20 units of the housing, which we're going to commit for the next 50 years to be affordable housing. And we got a $5 million grant from the city to buy the building. We couldn't have done it without them. So finding ways to get municipal government on side, finding ways to, in a sense, find the middle ground of language that people who are more, you know, remember, Brianna, when you showed that diagram, the two different ways of looking at stuff, finding some way to speak of the right-hand side of the diagram in left-hand side terms can be really, really useful. So I'll leave it at that because I'm bending over here and I'm getting a crick in my back. But anyway, you take care, everyone.
Thank you so much. Hard agree to everything that Peter just said. I think elected officials, particularly local ones, they can be such an incredible source of support and resources, or they cannot. And yeah, I think thinking less of opposition and more of like points of commonality when it's appropriate and when it isn't putting people in danger, I think is so good. The one tiny thing I'll like add to enhance that is that every few years you're not necessarily stuck with the same people and so in office, and so one of the things that can be really powerful that 501 sorry I was about to use our terms that a nonprofit that such as Push, the way that we are under our tax code, we're not allowed to interact in any way with particular people who might be campaigning for elected office. We can only campaign on like issues, you know, like we want to see this legislation that'll help our community, that's fine. But there's a different kind of nonprofit that can be formed under our tax code that is allowed to do things like promote a certain candidate and help them to get elected. And so that's something that absolutely, you know, is a really great resource. And that's something that we are also doing in partnership with an organization that is newly formed that has that safe designation, where that organization is going to get candidates running who are from the community and who have a lot of this analysis. And if they're able to win, that totally changes the game and the expectations, even amongst all the other, you know, electives of like what can happen. I'm going to check there.
Jimmy, you're currently muted. But I know
Hello?
hoping to speak. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to make some room for Opal because she had some remarks that she wanted to add on Peter. And Opal is also a member of our Climate Justice Advisory Committee. So please go ahead, Opal.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you for being here and representing Push. I really miss my days in Buffalo and doing community work there. What I wanted to say about being on the Parkdale Community Legal Services Board, it was really horrifying for me to see that even though Parkdale Community Legal Services was helping people to stay in their spaces and really fight to deal with reno evictions, that they themselves had to deal with that. And as Parkdale becomes more and more gentrified, one of the things that is really important for us is to maintain as many housing spaces as we can. That's why I'm saying kudos for the Parkdale Land Trust. But one of the things that we all know is that when people are caught in survival around housing and basic necessities like food and paying their bills, that they're not going to be coming out to get in and deal with things like advocacy and advocating for policy changes or any type of legalization or even demonstrating. So those are some of the things that we are really, really fighting for in Parkdale. And just like your school 77, as you can see, we're fighting the same thing. So it was a real win back in the day when Park was able to get the housing, which sits right above Park, for people who needed supportive housing and just people living in poverty. So this is something that is an ongoing situation in many, many areas of Toronto. Case in point, when you look at Jane and Finch, some of the buildings there are being resold to developers, and various pockets of neighborhoods you're seeing, especially what have been designated as priority neighborhoods, are being gentrified. So people who were born into poverty, which, as we all know, has been designed, were further being victimized. So as more and more groups pop up like Push and the works that we're doing, even though we've only gotten like 2-year funding, it's really important that we keep making that noise and keep interacting with politicians that are compassionate and care about what we're doing. And I think of counselors like Gord Perks and Kristen Wong Tang and I can't remember her name. Oh, Doucette, who's no longer a counselor. We have very few counselors who are really looking at working with community groups to help us with change. And I myself, as an elder on the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit for the City of Toronto, even though it's something that its time is way overdue and it's finally come, it's kind of, it has limited ability in that we don't even have social media presence to reach out and get in touch with community, so that more and more people know that there is some kind of a mechanism in place to address anti-Black racism. So when we speak about settlers and allies and Indigenous people and, all of the race relations that we're dealing with, at the age of 70, I am so moved that this time has finally come where we're sitting at the table and we're talking about healing the effects of colonialism and the genocidal effects that it's had on all facets of our life. So I know I can be long-winded. Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. I had just so much love and support and solidarity for all of that. And also just really echoing and drawing out that, when you're talking about people who need to spend so much of their energy and emotion and struggle and planning and resources on so many basic things, like so much of that is intentional. It's built into our systems. That's what we mean when we're talking about systemic racism and oppression and all those other things. Because if you're struggling for your life, then you can't be civically engaged in the same way. Or it's just massively hard and too much that people shouldn't be needing to take on. And like all of these other systems, even things that a lot of people take for granted, like working 40 or more hours a week, like even people, like myself and others who are drawn to the nonprofits to work, all of that is taking energy away from like traditional organizing and for just getting out on the streets and in communities and having this energy and this direction and realizing the strength that we have, and not to say that that isn't happening everywhere, because it is, and it has been for hundreds of years. But just it could be happening so much more if these systems were actively working to make it feel so impossible to be doing that. And for the people who are doing it to be putting so much of themselves on the line. And just, we particularly see that in the people who are the most impacted are also the ones who are most impacted by the struggle and needing to do that. And everything about that is not okay. And however we can try to tackle that, we need to. Thank you.
I just wanted to add kudos to this particular organization for making sure that language isn't a barrier, because so often when we go to meetings, people are left out because they don't speak, English is not their mother tongue. And we need to be having more of that in all of our spaces. Yes, we are finally doing, sign language, but very rarely do we have spaces where all languages are present so that all people can participate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Opal, for sharing. We're so happy to have someone like you as part of our Climate Justice Advisory Circle as well. I also have Lee, who's raised their hand, and I also want to make sure that we make some time for our Tibetan speakers. So Tewangla, the translator, if there are any questions from our Tibetan speakers, please just let us know and we'll make some time for them as well. So please, Lee, go ahead.
Hi, I wanted to say that one of the biggest barriers that I find here in Parkdale is that when we do have a really amazing idea for, say, an arts organization or a building project in the neighborhood, when it goes to meetings, community meetings, the barriers are such that like people speak and there's good debate, and then something happens. I'm not exactly sure what happens, but the project changes happen to the project, like you mentioned, changes, but instead of the project going forward, it just completely doesn't happen, and then the building sits empty. And that's so frustrating for me, especially when it's like a particular arts organization that I used and that I really believe in. And when so many artists are getting kicked out of the neighborhood, as well as all people with lesser incomes, etc. I want to know, when you first started at Push, or when Push first started, what you first worked on and how Push grew over time, what was added, kind of, can you give us like an overview or a timeline that would show like how the organization changed over time, and also maybe how it stayed the same?
Yeah, I will do my best.
I know it's a big question.
Yeah, it really started with two community activists who had like gone away to school, in one case Harvard, although at Harvard he caused a lot of good trouble, which is super fun to read about, and came back and were like, what can we do here? And just were knocking on doors, and really they didn't start with like a mission or an agenda. They just were talking to people and finding out from them what a possible like mission or agenda would be. And what came out of that the most was housing and jobs, and connected to housing always was utilities. So even though it's under housing, it's like, especially in the early times, although still now, those are sort of like a lot of the focus that we have. And so I don't know how they were able to get like the first house or whatever, but back 15 years ago, things were very affordable on the West Side. They were often, more run down and things like that, but they were able to start getting spaces and just working on them literally themselves, having a little money for contractors as needed, and just getting people in the community first, just building homes with them together as like a thing they did on the weekends, like just on a volunteer basis. And then as they were able to get more resources, being able to hire more contractors and hire neighborhood workers on, it's actually where some of our workforce started, because their idea was to get people connected to like unions and things like that. and contractors, developers, whoever, to just get these jobs. And they kept finding a lot of barriers, particularly just outright unapologetic racism. And so they were like, fine, we'll do it, and kind of figured out ways to try and do that, which has had lots of ups and downs and just so much difficulty in the workforce space since then. But really came from that, like, oh, let's connect them to what's already here. Oh. And so, yeah, they really started with just building houses, rehabbing, I should say, existing houses in the neighborhood together, and then eventually getting more and more professional at it. I think a turn came when they hired a lawyer by training who was doing a lot of that, and he connected them to like some of this federal funding, these like low income housing tax credits and things like that. It really like took a leap because suddenly we had the function of like, yes, this is how we fund this. But it also like permanently changed the organization. I think that was one of the big turning points, is when they started accessing that funding. And then I think the other thing that we have always done and has been a super strong part of it is campaigns, particularly starting around some of the utilities and National Fuel, which is our gas provider, and things like that, you know, organizing people around them and doing direct actions and getting arrested and getting lawsuits and things like that, which is a proud push tradition that carries on to this day. And so that it's also made our other work very interesting, because I'm more on the implementation side, where we're needing to work with elected officials and contractors and things like that in order to get people jobs and get green infrastructure installed and things like that. And so we'll be like we'll have something happen where we're getting close to a contract that's following on like 4 years of work that we've done building with this place. And then something that our organizing team does upsets somebody, and they're like, well, if you wanted this, you should have thought about that before you posted eviction notices on the Common Council doors. So yeah, but we love it, and we're not going to stop doing it, and we just make it work. And I'm on the implementation side, and organizing's like, oh no, I never thought that it would have that effect. And I'm like, don't stop. We'll figure it out. We'll find a different contract. But yeah, I think those are really the two, like the organizing and campaigns, and then the affordable housing development are really those two streams. And then just as we've grown, adding more and adding more capacity and adding more staff and having that direction be a little bit more towards, I don't want to say professionalizing, but having tasks done by staff more than they're done by community has been like a slow change. And then we had another big change. Literally the day that School 77 was finished was also the day that we celebrated our founder leaving, and not in that way, like in a happy way of him moving on to something new, and our longtime deputy director taking the helm, who's like really incredible. And I think that has definitely been a big change too, because it's the first time we've had different leadership, and you know, she's this amazing, incredible, powerful person who's just I think leading things in a different but also a very good way. And so that has been an adjustment for some of the long haulers who've been there since day one. But yeah, I feel myself adding too much, so I'm going to stop there and let more questions come. But thank you for that question, and hopefully I got to it.
Thank you so much, Brianna. Just being cognizant of time, I do know that there's one last question by Joe. They asked about the Push Buffalo's hiring hall. Maybe I can ask Joe if you'd like to elaborate on your question. We'll make it quick as we can.
Sure. Any more questions, or are we over time?
Just to follow up on your comments about some of the employment and the trying to develop a pipeline into.
I'm not hearing anyone, but it might just be me.
I don't know what's wrong. I've unmuted. Can anyone hear me?
I can hear Joe, but Brianna, I'm not sure. We can maybe try to type it in the chat just in case, if that would be helpful.
We can hear you.
Okay, so let me elaborate my question. Brianna, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Just to follow up on your comments on employment and the sort of the pipeline into the trade unions, could you talk a little bit about your hiring hall and sort of what successes you've had with that? I know here in Ontario, at least, temp agencies are relatively unregulated, and there've been lots of stories about really dodgy temp agencies that have hired out to bigger corporations.
Thank you. I
resulted
can
in
see it in the
deaths and
chat
whatnot.
now. So, oh, sorry. Wow, I really can't hear anything.
Yeah, so just if you could talk.
Yeah. Oh,
about
hiring hall is an up and down road, and I don't know if it's just because it's in my bucket for the last couple of years that I feel all the downs, because that's what I'm often trying to deal with and turn into things that are on an upswing. Oh no, I'm so sorry. I will totally wait until someone texts me in the chat to answer. Oh, of all
You
the
can
things
talk,
that
Joe.
happened, I'm so sorry, Joe. Yeah, so I think we've had up and down success with unions. Some of them are getting it, and we've had good referrals there, and some just aren't. I think temp agencies have just been horrendous across the board. There is one that is more recent, formed from someone who like split off because they couldn't stand what it was like anymore, and are more aligned with us, that we're starting to work with, which is really cool. But actually we formed ourselves as essentially a high road temp agency, so that we can be the employer of record and can have a contract with someone who then would, we would interview and place people on that site, and we would pay them and the contractor would pay us. And so we can kind of set a lot of the rules there, making sure that they have at minimum a family sustaining wage, and have different benefits, and have all of our wraparound supports, and also just our voice on site, particularly for when, as things always do, things get very tough with like racially motivated comments and things like that. Like, it's just one of the worst, most openly racist and gender discriminatory fields to enter. And so just trying to help people deal with that, and also come back at the place that is hiring them to be like, this is not okay. We literally have it in our contract that we're not accepting things like that, and we'll be following up. And we do, we had a site where we had a bunch of people on, and there were, a lot of really terrible racial comments and things like that. But because they were a group, they kind of like were like working through it and just trying to let it roll off their back. And then they showed up to work one day, and there was a slur that was spray painted on the work site. And so when we went back to the developer, being like, you need to fix this right now. Very shockingly, for a large Buffalo developer like this was, they not only like addressed the situation, but they actually fired the person involved, and they fired the site supervisor, saying that it was on his watch and he should have been keeping things more under control so they didn't get to that point, which is really not something that I would unfortunately expect, although we should. That's exactly what should happen. So yeah, just things like that have been a struggle. We provide free training for people, but even that, because we're working with usually the people who fall through the cracks of other workforce development that already exists to catch people who have a little more privilege and can navigate it, there's just so many barriers with transportation and education and logistics. You know, it's really huge. And so we'll have some successes, and then we'll have some failures and some in between, and we'll lose track of people if, you know, they change their phone number or whatever. And that part has been really disheartening, but the things that have gone well have been really great, where they've been able to, you know, get rehired after they re-enter from being incarcerated and move up the ladder in the wherever they are, or things like that. We really love to see. I think the thing that we've been almost the most frustrated with and are trying to find an answer to and actually adapt our own strategies is that the more we're doing the temp work, the more that the companies are just not hiring people on, even if they do a good job and prove themselves. And so that's not getting us to that end goal that we want. And hiring hall really is more about stopping the bad and building individual wealth in marginalized communities to then be able to do all of the other things and build community wealth and things like that. And it's not getting us to that goal. Sometimes it is with some places, but a lot of times it's not. And so how can we work with places where they're just already on board and are willing to look at more long-term things and hiring and things like that? Because if someone's not getting a good career moving job out of it, then we're not winning in the way that we want to be. Sorry, going long, so I'm going to check again.
Thank you so much, Brianna. I just wanted to close out with Chemi's help. Wanted to first thank you so much, Brianna, for your incredible presentation, for being so open and honest with us and really sharing the successes and the challenges that Push Buffalo has been having. And yeah, really inspiring our work. And even though we live in different countries, in different cities, we're certainly connected by the Great Lakes, we're connected by our struggles, and we're just really grateful that you were able to provide your time to share with us. And also wanted to thank the organizers, the co-design community group that helped us come up with some questions for this session, and also all the participants tonight who have been part of this discussion, contributing your questions, comments, and listening in. So I wanted to say thank you and remind everyone that in the chat message, we have an evaluation form. It's very, very simple. Don't be scared off by it. It's only a couple questions, but it'll really help us improve the next session and really understand what people got from this session, what we could change. And it really does help us continue this work. And I'll pass it over to Chemi to share a bit about the next session coming up next week. Thanks.
Hey folks, thanks Heather. Just wanted to do a quick wrap and let you folks know about our next session, which is on December 1st, next Tuesday, 6 to 8 again. We did face some technical difficulties today, so apologies for that. And I know that we're about 3 minutes over time. And so without further ado, just wanted to let you know to sign up and register. You can scan the QR code on the poster, or just sign up, register at the bit.ly website. Thank you so much again for joining us today. That is our writing relations. We have another session on December 15th, which is the Climate Justice Circle, which will be again an open discussion and forum for all community members to join to really envision what climate justice is going to look like in Parkdale. So we welcome you to both the spaces, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourselves to say goodbye and thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for
Bye.
Good night.
Good evening.
I thought we were debriefing.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Stay safe
Thanks.
and healthy.
Thank you.
Upo?
Thank
Oh,
you.
I thought we were debriefing. It's
Good
okay.
night.
Yes.
Not today. However, I'll reach out to you right after this call. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Ashimi. Thank you to everyone. It was a pleasure for me to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for joining.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, Lee.
Perhaps we can stop the recording.